Mount Erebus. Even the name carries a shadow, doesn't it?
It really does.
In Greek myth, Erebus was the embodiment of darkness itself.
Right.
It's a name that just seems linked to grim ends. You think of the Franklin expedition, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror vanishing into the ice.
And then Mount Erebus in Antarctica. Same name, different tragedy.
Exactly. The backdrop for another deeply unsettling story. It makes you wonder if some names just sort of echo through history, tied to misfortune in these remote, icy places.
It's certainly striking how that name connects those disparate tragedies. It's a potent reminder of how even seemingly abstract concepts like names can become intertwined with real-world events, setting a powerful, almost ominous tone for what we're about to delve into.
Absolutely. Because today's deep dive takes us straight to that Antarctic volcano, Mount Erebus, and the 1979 crash of Air New Zealand Flight 901.
Huge event for New Zealand.
Oh, massive.
Yeah.
This wasn't just an accident. It was, pivotal. A story thick with political intrigue, controversy that hasn't entirely faded away. And the truly unsettling part, it might all trace back to something as simple and as infuriating when you think about the consequences as a single typing error.
Just one typo.
Yeah, that really makes you think about how fragile these complex systems can be.
It does. A single typo with such, far-reaching devastation really underscores how even the most minute inaccuracies can have monumental and tragic repercussions, especially within the tightly controlled and high-stakes environment of aviation.
Exactly. Our source for this is a really in-depth article, meticulously recounting the disaster and the long, complicated aftermath.
A very detailed account.
So consider this your streamlined route to understanding this crucial piece of history. We're extracting the essential facts, the surprising twists, the enduring points of contention, all without getting bogged down in, excessive detail. Okay, let's unpack this story.
Okay, and to truly understand the context of Flight 901, we really need to first look at the phenomenon of these Antarctic sightseeing flights.
All right, so picture the scene. It's the late 1970s. Qantas, the Australian airline, starts these incredible scenic flights down to Antarctica.
Pioneering stuff.
Totally.
Yeah.
Suddenly, this frozen continent, usually just for scientists, becomes accessible from the skies. Air New Zealand sees this and thinks, we want in.
Makes sense. Competition.
So they decide to launch their own Antarctic experience using their wide-body DC-10 jets.
And the appeal, as the article makes clear, was just immense. It offered a perspective on a truly otherworldly landscape that, few had ever witnessed.
Oh, it was unlike anything else. Passengers got these absolutely breathtaking panoramas, colossal icebergs, sculpted by the elements, the stark alien beauty of Victoria Land.
Stunning scenery.
And looming large, Mount Erebus itself. Imagine gazing at that incredible vista while sipping champagne, having gourmet food.
Quite the experience.
They even had Antarctic experts on board, initially Sir Edmund Hillary himself, giving live commentary.
This Sir Edmund Hillary, wow.
Yeah. And incredibly, passengers could even go into the open cockpit, chat with the pilots, take in the views through that huge DC-10 windshield.
That's amazing. Access like that wouldn't happen today.
No way. Plus, when they flew near Scott Base, the crew would broadcast their radio chatter over the PA system. A real novelty, a thrill for passengers.
And the cost wasn't astronomical either, was it?
That's the astonishing thing. Around NZ $275 less than a standard international flight back then.
So very popular.
Incredibly high demand, yeah.
Right.
Initially, the planning for these flights was a bit informal, kind of ad hoc.
Right.
But by 1978, Air New Zealand standardized the route, programming a specific set of coordinates into the plane's inertial navigation system, the INS.
And that INS is crucial to our story. It allowed for precise navigation over vast, featureless distances where, ground-based navigation aids were scarce.
Exactly. This INS let them navigate accurately over Antarctica without needing ground beacons. The article notes the initial series of these formalized flights in '78 apparently went off without a hitch.
Seemed successful at first.
It did. And that brings us to 1979, with another 4 of these special flights scheduled. Our focus, naturally, is the very last one of that season, November 28th, Flight 901.
Okay.
Now, the article mentions pilots actually competed to get on these Antarctic flights. Captain Jim Collins was particularly pleased to be scheduled for this final one.
Why was that?
Well, there was a feeling that rising fuel costs might mean it would be the last for a while. So very sought-after assignment.
Okay. And the article details the crew with Captain Collins.
Yes. We had First Officers Greg Casson and Graham Lucas, Flight Engineers Gordon Brooks and Nicholas Maloney, and the Antarctic expert Peter Mulgrew, who stepped in after Sir Edmund Hillary had to withdraw.
Okay.
Plus 14 flight attendants and a relief crew, extra pilots for the long haul. All told, 257 people on board.
A full flight.
Absolutely. The crew had their pre-flight briefing back on November 9th, covered all the operational stuff, the planned flight path, unique aspects of flying in Antarctica. After that, cleared for the flight on November 28th.
So, on the day the flight departs from Auckland, can you walk us through those initial stages and then when contact was lost?
Certainly. Plane took off from Auckland early morning, passengers excited, snapping pictures. Captain Collins and First Officer Casson programmed their flight path into the nav computer using the coordinates from their flight plan.
Standard procedure.
Right. And a copy of this plan had also been sent ahead to McMurdo Station, the U.S. research base on Ross Island.
Okay.
About 5 hours into the flight, flying down the coast of Victoria Land, Flight 901 contacts McMurdo ATC for the latest weather.
And what was the report?
Around 12:18 p.m. local time, they were told. Overcast layer at 2,000 feet, but good visibility at ground level, about 40 miles. The controller even suggested that once they were in radar range, he could guide them down to 1,500 feet for potentially better views.
That's a key suggestion.
It is. And the crew's decision in response is crucial.
They decided to descend.
They agreed, yes.
Yeah.
But a little later, 12:32 p.m., they spotted a break in the clouds and decided to descend under VMC visual meteorological conditions.
So flying by sight.
Exactly, relying on seeing where they were going, not just instruments. They told McMurdo they were descending from 18,000 feet to 10,000 feet, about 43 miles out.
Okay.
To stay in that clear patch, they actually flew 2 loops as they came down. Then, 12:45 p.m., back on their original planned course, they reported continuing descent to 2,000 feet, still VMC.
Still visual.
McMurdo acknowledged, expecting further contact shortly.
But as we know, that subsequent communication never occurred.
Exactly. The minutes ticked by, no further contact. The controllers at McMurdo started to feel, well, uneasy.
Understandably.
All attempts to reach Flight 901 went unanswered. After about an hour, they sent search aircraft along the expected flight path. Nothing.
Just
Gone. McMurdo then notified authorities back in New Zealand, lost contact with the DC-10. And that's when this agonizing period of waiting and uncertainty began for everyone.
the timeline in the article really underscores that increasing dread as each hour passed without news.
It does. By 4 p.m. New Zealand time, the plane was due to contact Auckland Center on its return leg. Silence.
Scheduled landing time.
7 p.m. in Christchurch. Came and went. At this point, fear hardened into grim realization. Authorities finally told Air New Zealand Flight 901 was overdue.
And the news broke.
Soon after. First reports DC-10, 257 people, missing somewhere in Antarctica. The sheer scale, just difficult to comprehend.
And the confirmation of the worst came early the next morning.
Yes. Around 1:205 a.m. Antarctic time, a search team saw wreckage on the lower slopes of Mount Erebus, altitude about 1,465 feet.
Devastating.
Their report was brutally brief. Debris at crash site being blown by wind. No apparent survivors.
Oh, God.
The next morning, a ground team reached the site, confirmed the horrific truth. All 257 people perished instantly on impact.
Just awful. The worst peacetime disaster in New Zealand's history.
Yeah, and the article points out it felt like everyone in New Zealand knew someone on that flight. The focus immediately shifted to understanding why. A huge, complex task given the remote, incredibly challenging location.
That silence from Flight 901, the start of a desperate search, turning hope into grim reality, and launching this complex, controversial investigation we need to explore now.
Exactly. And this is where Ron Chippendale comes in, New Zealand's Chief Inspector of Air Accidents. The article emphasizes, though, his office wasn't really equipped for something this big.
Right. They usually handled smaller accidents, didn't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Minor incidents, small aircraft. Their biggest previous investigation involved 23 fatalities. Flight 901 was a whole different league.
Yeah.
And the world was watching.
So the recovery Operation Overdue must have been immense.
Immense and incredibly difficult. Hellish is the word the article uses.
I can only imagine.
For days, severe weather kept anyone from reaching the wreckage. When they finally got there, December 3rd, debris scattered over hundreds of meters of mountainside, snow blackened by jet fuel. A big fire after impact.
And the human cost.
Tragically dispersed throughout the wreckage. The recovery team, police, investigators, mountaineers, body recovery specialists worked for a week under unimaginable conditions.
What kind of conditions?
Relentless bad weather, scavenging birds, and just the sheer psychological trauma of what they were seeing. By December 9th, they'd recovered all the bodies they could find and left. But the article says the experience left deep, lasting scars on almost everyone involved.
An incredibly grim task. But vital evidence was recovered too.
Yes. Amidst all that, they carefully collected everything. Cockpit charts, notebooks, passenger cameras, and crucially, the 2 black boxes.
The flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder.
Exactly. Chippendale and his team then began the painstaking process, analyzing the data, interviews, examining recovered photos, trying to piece together what happened.
And Chippendale's initial conclusions, his official report, largely focused on the captain, right?
That's correct. Chippendale concluded the primary cause was Captain Collins deciding to descend to 1,500 feet over what he thought was the Ross Sea.
But the briefing material specified minimum safe altitudes.
They did. 16,000 feet for most of the path, with a limited exception down to 6,000 feet under specific visual conditions. In the area where they actually were, overland near Erebus, 16,000 feet was the absolute minimum according to civil aviation rules.
So Chippendale saw that descent as the critical factor.
He did. It's interesting, though, given what came out later about the flight path, that the initial focus was so heavily on the pilot's descent. Did that maybe miss other critical factors early on?
That's a crucial point. Chippendale also looked at the aircraft's pre-programmed flight route, the nav track.
Yes. According to the coordinate data given to the investigators, the nav track, the route programmed into the INS, went directly over the summit of Mount Erebus.
Which seems odd for sightseeing.
Right. Air New Zealand initially confirmed this was the correct path, but they also mentioned the coordinates for the final waypoint were updated the night before the flight.
Updated? Why?
Supposedly to correct a previous 43-kilometer error. Before this last-minute update, the nav track ran down the center of McMurdo Sound, way west of the volcano.
So the route they thought they had.
Exactly. Air New Zealand claimed this earlier route, used on all 14 previous flights, had been wrong all along, but nobody noticed, because pilots usually switch to visual flying down the sound before reaching that final point.
Seems convenient.
Critically, this earlier wrong route down the sound was the one shown to the pilots, including Captain Collins, at their briefing on November 9th.
So they were briefed on one route.
But the computer was programmed with another shifted route just before they left. And there was no evidence Collins and Cassim were ever told about this last-minute change.
But despite knowing the route was changed, Chippendale's report downplayed its significance for the crew.
Exactly. He acknowledged they had been briefed on the McMurdo Sound route, but stated, and this is a key controversial line, in the case of this crew, no evidence was found to suggest that they had been misled by this error.
Wow. That's a strong statement.
It is. He also raised the possibility of whiteout conditions contributing.
Whiteout, where everything looks flat.
Yeah, a deceptive phenomenon where lack of shadows makes terrain look featureless. This was despite weather reports and passenger photos just before impact showing good visibility below the clouds.
Did the pilots have training for whiteout?
Chippendale noted Air New Zealand didn't provide specific training for it. He also mentioned that the ground proximity warning whoop, 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 pull it, activated in the last 6 seconds.
Too late.
Far too late to avoid impact. Chippendale felt the crew missed other clues too. GPS coordinates, the location of Beaufort Island, radio chatter, and he interpreted some background talk on the cockpit voice recorder as the crew being unsure of their position.
Ah, the CVR interpretation. That became a major point of contention, didn't it?
Absolutely. Chippendale put significant weight on transcriptions of what seemed like uncertain remarks attributed to the flight engineers in the back of the cockpit.
But the audio quality
Was poor. Multiple voices, background noise. The transcripts were heavily enhanced by a British voice analysis expert, but pilots who knew the engineers questioned the accuracy. Like the line, "Bit thick here, eh, Bert?" suggesting doubt about the weather. Air New Zealand's own pilots initially marked it unintelligible. Plus, there was no one named Bert on the flight deck.
That's problematic.
Very. The Pilots Association even suggested Chippendale might have altered or invented parts to fit his pilot error theory.
So Chippendale's report offered an initial explanation, but left many questions and, well, unease, which led to the Royal Commission of Inquiry under Justice Peter Mahan.
Exactly, a major turning point. Mahan's inquiry was far more extensive. Lots of witnesses under oath, mountains of documents.
And he focused on the nav track change early on.
Right away. It emerged that the track was originally drafted back in '78 by R&Z's chief navigator, C.B. Hewitt. The intention was to fly over Erebus towards the McMurdo NDB, a radio beacon.
But errors were made.
2 critical typing errors. First, minor one. Used coordinates for Williams Field nearby instead of the NDB. Only shifted it about 3 kilometers. But the second error was huge. Wrong longitude. placed the waypoint 43 kilometers west of where it should have been, right in the middle of McMurdo Sound.
Ah, so that's where the McMurdo Sound route came from, a typo.
Apparently. So any plane following at that programmed route would fly safely down the sound, with Erebus off to the left.
And that incorrect route was the one put into briefing materials and charts shown to pilots.
Precisely, including Captain Collins on November 9th. Many other pilots confirmed. That was the route they were shown, the route they flew.
Okay. But then, just before Flight 901, someone noticed the error.
Yeah, here's another twist. November 14th, just 2 weeks before the crash, another Air NZ pilot, Les Simpson, was reviewing the coordinates. He realized the final waypoint was way out in McMurdo Sound, not matching the briefing.
So he reported it.
He brought it to Ross Johnson, the director of Antarctic flights.
And this is where recollections differ.
Significantly. Simpson recalls suggesting all pilots scheduled for the route be told immediately about the discrepancy. Johnson, however, remembered Simpson suggesting the waypoint be changed to the McMurdo NDB location.
So Johnson thought it was just a minor correction.
Exactly. Johnson checked an old chart showing the waypoint at Williams Field. So he thought Simpson just meant changing Williams Field to McMurdo NDB, that minor 3-kilometer shift. He didn't grasp the original huge 43 kilometers westward error.
So he didn't see the urgency.
Right. He didn't think it required informing the pilots about this seemingly tiny adjustment. So on the day of the flight, Collins and Casson get the updated coordinates.
Still thinking they're heading down McMurdo Sound as briefed.
Exactly. And in the rush of pre-flight checks, entering all those numbers, neither pilot noticed the crucial longitude digit had changed.
Wow. Okay. And Mahan's analysis of the cockpit voice recorder differed from Chippendale's, too.
Completely. Mahan reviewed the tapes and transcripts, concluded there was no convincing evidence the crew was uncertain about their position or path.
He questioned the background conversations.
He did. Raised serious questions about their reliability, the enhancement methods, the absurdity of lines like, "Bit thick here, eh, Bert?" when there was no Bert.
So, Mahan's view.
His assessment was the flight deck crew sounded confident, gave no indication they thought they were off course or in danger.
And what about the whiteout possibility in the terrain?
Mahan explored that meticulously. The gentle slope leading up to the crash site, combined with potential whiteout, he thought it could easily create a deceptive illusion.
Making the mountainside look like flat sea ice.
Exactly. What they expected to see based on the briefed McMurdo Sound route. He also dug into why Chippendale dismissed the nav track change so readily. Turned out Chippendale couldn't prove Collins had plotted the briefed route in his atlas beforehand.
But Mahan found evidence for that.
He did. Mahan learned Collins had taken his atlas, and his wife and daughter saw him plot the course the night before.
And they confirmed.
Unequivocally confirmed the route he plotted went down McMurdo Sound, west of Erebus. Exactly as briefed. Mahan accepted this as proof Collins was navigating based on that outdated, wrong information.
Okay, what about the descent below minimum altitudes? Chippendale saw it as pilot error, but Mahan.
Mahan found descending below 16,000 and 6,000 feet was actually common practice on these flights.
Common practice. With the airline's knowledge.
Yes, with Air New Zealand management's knowledge, Mahan concluded even if the Civil Aviation Division hadn't formally approved it. The pilot who gave the briefings even testified he told crews they could descend, as directed by McMurdo ATC.
What evidence did Mahan have for this?
Loads. Published articles, passenger photos showing low flying, Air New Zealand's own brochures advertising cruising at 2,000 feet.
Their own brochures.
Yes. And even an account from the president of McDonnell Douglas, the plane's manufacturer, who'd flown previously and mentioned being down at 3,000 feet in Air New Zealand's In-Flight magazine.
Wow. And management still denied knowing.
Under oath, yeah. Continued to claim no knowledge. Mahan found it totally unbelievable that experienced pilots would routinely do this without company knowledge, explicit or implicit.
It also seems flying over Erebus Summit wasn't logical for sightseeing anyway.
Exactly. Mahan raised that. Why choose the correct track over the summit? Flying down McMurdo Sound gave better, more dramatic views of the mountain.
And arguably safer.
Much safer. Avoided high terrain, active volcano. This led Mahan to wonder, maybe there wasn't a typo. Maybe Air NZ always intended the flights to go down the sound.
He questioned the whole typo story.
He did. Pointed to the lack of original documents corroborating it, the sheer number of errors needed to explain the final route. He theorized the typo story was made up to cover a memory lapse or an unapproved change. Maybe the over Erebus route was only documented for a test flight.
And he criticized the overall preparation.
Yeah, highlighted inadequate prep for these unique flights. Missing info in briefings, inconsistent materials, poor communication between departments, relying on verbal orders, no paper trail.
So all these findings led Mahan to a dramatically different conclusion than Chippendale's initial report.
Yes. Mahan's final report stated unequivocally, Collins and Casson made no significant errors. The disaster was directly and solely attributable to Air New Zealand's last-minute, unnotified change to the nav track and their failure to tell the crew.
He basically exonerated the pilots.
Completely. Mahan firmly believed Collins was diligently tracking based on the info he had no reason to suspect a programmed route was wrong. In Mahan's view, Captain Collins was an innocent victim of a massive corporate blunder.
But Mahan didn't stop there. He went further, accusing Air New Zealand of a deliberate cover-up.
This is where it gets truly dramatic. As Mahan's inquiry progressed, he grew suspicious of Air NZ's testimony and evidence. Noticed inconsistencies, what he came to believe were outright lies, deliberate deception.
Like what?
Ross Johnson claiming he told pilots the route went over Erebus at the briefing, flatly denied by everyone else there. CEO Maury Davis denying knowledge of low flying despite overwhelming evidence.
And suspicious circumstances, too.
Yes. Pages missing from Collins' logbook after the crash. Paperwork vanished from Casson's home. Collins' own home broken into, only passports and flight documents taken.
A break-in?
Yeah, and maybe most damning. Mahan found evidence of post-crash document shredding at Air NZ headquarters, seemingly aimed at destroying internal documents about the nav track change that weren't part of the official file.
This accumulation led to Mahan's explosive conclusion.
In his final report, Mahan didn't just state the cause. He leveled this unprecedented, scathing accusation against Air New Zealand, accused them of a deliberate, systematic attempt to deceive the Royal Commission.
And that's where the famous freeze comes in.
Yes. He stated in the report he'd been forced to listen to an orchestrated litany of lies from Air NZ witnesses aimed at concealing what he called disastrous administrative blunders.
An extraordinary accusation from a judge.
Absolutely unprecedented. Sent massive shockwaves through New Zealand.
The immediate aftermath must have been intense, a political firestorm.
Totally. Mahan's accusations resonated deeply with the public. Overwhelming support for Mahan, outrage at the airline. Widespread calls for CEO Maury Davis to resign.
Which he eventually did.
He resisted initially, but the board forced him out. But the Prime Minister then, Robert Muldoon, staunchly defended Air NZ, attacked Mahan's findings, blamed the pilots.
That must have fueled public anger even more.
Oh, absolutely. Intensified accusations of a government cover-up. It became a major national political crisis, dominating headlines for ages.
And Air New Zealand didn't just accept Mahan's findings, they challenged them legally.
They did. Couldn't appeal directly, since it was an inquiry, not a court. So they sought judicial review, arguing Mahan had denied them natural justice by alleging conspiracy without giving them adequate chance to defend against those charges.
How did that play out?
Went to the NZ Court of Appeals. They sided with Air NZ on the specific legal point of breach of natural justice, especially regarding an order for Air NZ to pay inquiry costs without proper notice.
But what about the conspiracy finding itself?
The justices were divided. Some didn't dismiss the possibility of organized deception. Others strongly disagreed with Mahan on that point.
And the legal battle went even higher.
To the Privy Council in London, the highest court then. They ultimately upheld the Court of Appeals ruling. Mahan's conspiracy finding was outside the inquiry's scope, evidence insufficient to definitively support it.
But they expressed some sympathy for Mahan.
They did acknowledge their reluctance in reaching that conclusion. So legally, Air NZ was cleared of conspiracy on procedural grounds. But that phrase,
an orchestrated litany of lies,
became totally ingrained in NZ popular culture, collective memory. Mahan tried to resign, government refused. He kept giving interviews, stuck to his guns about the deception. Chippendale tried defending his report, but was largely ignored after Mahan's bombshells.
And the opposition called for an apology.
Yeah, the Labour Party called for Air NZ to apologize for its role in handling of the investigation.
Amidst all this controversy, the safety implications kind of got overshadowed.
They did, somewhat. The most immediate practical consequence: indefinite cancellation of Antarctic sightseeing flights by Air NZ and Qantas.
Qantas eventually resumed them.
In the 90s, yeah, but with significantly enhanced safety measures. Air NZ said they had no plans to ever restart theirs.
Did Chippendale make safety recommendations?
He did, mostly focus on preventing similar nav errors and communication breakdowns on future Antarctic flights. But as the article notes, kind of irrelevant for NZ carriers since they stopped flying there?
So the enduring legacy is complex, still debated today.
Very much so. Even with a formal apology from Air NZ and the government in 2019 on the 40th anniversary, that fundamental question remains for many. Was there a deliberate, orchestrated conspiracy?
Or something else.
Some suggest the litany of lies wasn't centrally coordinated, maybe just individual acts of self-preservation by various witnesses. Maughan's own strong opinions, his sometimes dramatic style, definitely fueled the debate too.
But there's general agreement on the core issue.
Pretty much general consensus in NZ that Air New Zealand was ultimately at fault because of the critical errors in the flight path info given to the crew and the failure to communicate the changes.
It even inspired satire.
Yeah, the comedy duo McPhail and Gadsby did a song, famously mentioning conveniently forgetting the orchestrated litany of lies. But ultimately, it's crucial we remember the 257 victims who died on that desolate mountainside.
Absolutely. So, bringing our deep dive to a close, we've looked at this seemingly exciting sightseeing flight ending in devastation, revealing a complex web of errors, miscommunications, and this profound, enduring controversy about the cause and the aftermath.
Right. And it leaves us with some really significant lingering questions, doesn't it? Was that orchestrated litany of lies a genuine conspiracy, high-level stuff, or more fragmented, individual failures driven by self-preservation?
Hard to know for sure.
What broader lessons can we draw about accountability, corporate responsibility, how hard it is to find the whole truth after a major disaster?
And how does a nation cope?
Exactly. How does a nation grapple with such a deep loss and all the unanswered questions that just hang there?
Well, this deep dive, even condensed, gives us, valuable insights into human error, organizational dynamics, the often turbulent search for truth and justice after immense tragedy, themes that resonate far beyond the specific disaster.
They really do. And maybe the most unsettling part is that even decades later, the full, complete truth behind that orchestrated litany of lies, as Maughan put it so powerfully, it still feels a bit elusive, open to interpretation. It's a chilling reminder, really, of how incredibly difficult it can be to unravel everything, especially when deception might be involved after a major disaster. Leaves a lasting unease, prompts ongoing reflection.